and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Trent Dyrsmid. And now, Trent lives in a beautiful part of the world, Boise, Idaho. Originally born in Vancouver, which is one of my favourite cities, but he moved down south further, I believe, because it rained too much. So, great to have you on this show, Trent. It's an absolute pleasure.
Jeff, thank you so much for making some time to have me here. It is a pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to tell a bit more about Trent's journey. Trent is a serial entrepreneur. He's a husband and father and the founder of Bright Ideas Co., which is a podcast he started in 2010 when people didn't know how to spell podcasting apart from Pat Flynn, who is one of the founders. He also has a seven-figure e-commerce business that he basically he fired himself from that but still makes seven figures. And he's almost had 10 years experience with digital marketing and e-commerce. His Bright Ideas podcast is about, where he interviews e-commerce entrepreneurs and other fascinating people in that niche. Profit magazine named Trent's first company as one of Canada's Profit 100 fastest growing companies for 2 years in a row before he sold it in 2008. Business in Vancouver magazine named Trent a top 40 under 40 entrepreneur. Now, I don't know whether he's under 40 anymore, but I think he might be. He looks maybe 38.
A little older than that.
You still look 38 to me, Trent. Trent's current company is ranked 254 on the 2019 Inc. 5000 list and 622 on the 2020 Inc. 5000 list of America's of the most successful private companies. So, Trent, I've been really looking forward to having this conversation, and you've been doing podcasts for 11 years, if I'm have my maths correct. And so I know we had a little chat prior to hitting the record button here, but what made you start the podcast, and then what keeps you going?
So I'm going to give a nod to Pat Flynn. I was an early follower of his work, and I quickly figured out that in order to make my blog successful, I was going to have to write a lot. And while I can write, and I have written a book and hundreds of blog posts, it's not my favorite thing to do. And so when I saw that Pat started his show, I thought, well, I'm going to start one too. And so that was the original vision it was going to be an easy way for me to create content, which would then attract an audience, which I would be able to then sell my stuff to. There was, and that has happened to be sure, but there was a very unexpected benefit of starting a podcast. And it's the reason why I encourage virtually everybody to start a podcast. And that is this: being a podcast host is the single greatest networking tool that I have ever discovered, for the simple reason that it enables me to email a complete stranger who I would like to have an interaction with and extend an invitation to them to be on my show. Now, it doesn't work every single time. Obviously, if I emailed Tim Ferriss, he's probably going to say no because he's got plenty of visibility on his own platform. But there are lots of people who like being on shows. It's an ego stroke for many people, I think for almost anyone. And it's a way for me to then begin building a relationship, kind of like with my laser pointer. As I mentioned to you, you can go, if you want to build your network, you can go to conferences, which is time consuming and expensive. And maybe you'll meet somebody interesting because you don't really know who's who, so to speak, unless, they got name tags on and you've done your research beforehand, but it's a little bit luck of the draw. Whereas a podcast, I can be very, very specific about who I want to reach out to and who I want to have as a guest on my show. And that has been extremely beneficial to me over the roughly decade that I've been doing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you say that, Trent, because I didn't have enough motivation to start the podcast, which I started this podcast just beginning of last year, just before COVID hit. So that was good timing because I didn't have to leave the office then, really, did I? So... But I totally agree with you. One of the reasons I started and was the motivation for me to start the podcast was relationship building, almost like networking on steroids, really. And you mentioned the laser point concept. I think you're exactly right. Look, I love going to conferences because the energy and I suppose sometimes the randomness of the networking And I quite like that randomness of networking, bumping into people that you didn't plan to or didn't think were interesting or even know were around. Some of the best people I know on the planet come out of those random intersections at events. But I think you're absolutely right. Podcasting is number one benefit, and most fun is the networking and relationship building. And you've been playing it for a long time. So what are the biggest learnings apart from relationship building, the networking? What are some of the other learnings you got from launching your podcast?
From all the mistakes that I've made, you mean?
That's fine.
Yeah. There's a number of them. I actually did a YouTube video about this just a little while ago. I'm not sure if it's been published or not, but if it hasn't, it will be soon. More mistakes than you can possibly count. Mistakes, I would say the biggest ones are not necessarily, are not having an editorial calendar where you are planning your content in advance so that you can align any product launches or what have you with that content. So that was something that, I really didn't do a good job of in the beginning. Now, is that mandatory to do? No, it's not mandatory, but there is absolutely a benefit to thinking about what am I going to produce and when am I going to produce it and who am I going to interview and so forth. Plan that out quarter by quarter by quarter, and it's a better idea to do that than not. I would say that my single greatest mistake, though, is to not put ad dollars behind promoting the show. Now, early on, when there wasn't a whole lot of competition, it was relatively easy to get traction. But these days, as I'm sure everyone who has a phone in their pocket with a podcast app on it knows, there's an endless number of shows. And the production quality of the shows has gone up, so you got to make sure that you have good audio. So there's a mistake too. Talking on a cheap microphone, don't want to do that. No. If most people still listen to podcasts in their ear, they're not watching them. There is an increasing number of people who are watching them, and that'll be another mistake that I'll cover in a minute. But making sure that you have really good audio and that you're recording in a dedicated space and that, there's not dogs barking and doing all these things that would be really annoying for people to listen to, I think is incredibly important. So we'll call that mistake number 2. So mistake number 3 was not promoting the show effectively. I'll call it amplification using ads. Now, it's really, really effective to get on other people's shows like this because I'm tapping right now. You have an existing audience that I'm essentially tapping into and hoping to hijack, and vice versa. Because if they're listening to your show, that means they already like listening to podcasts. And if they already like listening to podcasts, so long as I don't come across as a dimwit, they might like to listen to my show at some point. So I venture to guess that a few people from your audience will at least check out an episode or 2 of my show. Maybe they'll stick, maybe they won't. But in the beginning, I didn't put a lot of effort into trying to get myself on other people's shows, and I think that was a mistake. And then, as I mentioned to you off before we hit record, one of my greatest mistakes in all of my online businesses is my total and complete failure to become proficient with advertising. I would dabble in it from time to time, and I would lose money every single time that I did it because I didn't really know I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. And there are very clear and well-defined best practices when it comes to creating campaigns, and that's a topic that we'll go into it as much or as little as you like it. Mm-hmm. We could talk about that for the entire show. But as the number of podcasts has increased, getting new eyeballs has become an increasing challenge, and running paid amplification is one way that you can absolutely do that. So I would chalk that up to a big mistake. And then the final thing is YouTube. So for years, my show was audio only. And I did a survey at some point in the past, like, hey, do you listen to the show or do you watch the show? And the vast majority of people listened to the show, and because there was a lot of extra overhead burden on me to produce the video version, I simply chose not to do it. Now I have a full team and a video editor, and of course it's easy to do, and I think you said it's the same for you. But you got to get there. You got to get to the point where you have the systems and you have the people and you have the team. And so, because YouTube is an incredibly powerful place, it's a search engine. People do like to watch shows more now than they did in the past. So if you're not putting your show on YouTube, you're just missing out on views. And, if you're going to go through the effort to create the content in the first place, you might as well try and get as many views and downloads as you can. And YouTube is a very effective channel to help you to do that. Yeah. So I've there's probably more mistakes that I've made. I know there is, but those were some pretty big ones.
I think you've nailed some of the most important things that you should do if you're going to launch a podcast and grow it. When I launched this beginning of last year, I discovered Zoom, and the fact is that it recorded separate tracks for each speaker. It was easy to use. It automatically downloaded and create a file on your computer. But what I did do, but didn't do the production initially, was I did record the video. And about 2 months in, then we took that video draft, and then because I didn't want to overcomplicate the production process, the whole thing. So we started a YouTube channel, but only about 2 months later. So in other words, we planned to do it, but not try to overwhelm ourselves in terms of the doing. Yeah. Because if you try and do everything, then you're just going to be an overwhelm. Yeah. But we luckily, in watching, the reason I learnt was because one of my team talked about Joe Rogan to me, and I went and had a look at what Joe Rogan had been doing. Of course, Joe Rogan's an overnight success after starting in 2008, I think it was. And he started didn't start YouTube to 2014, I think. And if you have a look at his you go back to his first few episodes on YouTube, they're horrifying, frankly. Horrifying in the sense that the production was just terrible. It was like him hanging out with buddies with snowflakes going down the screen. It was just, but fast forward to 2020, Joe's now one of the top podcasters on the planet, just sold the rights for, I think, a few years to Spotify for about 100 million. He gets insane views on YouTube, like 200 million a month or something. But look, we all can't necessarily get to that level, but I think it's just interesting to watch someone's journey that just took the step into starting. In other words, despite being terribly imperfect, and I think that's part of the journey, isn't it? Like, start and learn, and don't be too precious about it, but perfection isn't going to serve you if you really want to get started. So I really value your insights on that, and I totally agree with you. Now, you did mention before too, in pre-recording, about that you haven't spent, and you mentioned just then that you didn't spend enough time amplifying your reach of your podcast, and now you're actually doing a lot more of that. You're now on YouTube as well. So you mentioned that you discovered an aha moment about a week ago that about using Facebook for testing and advertising the podcast. Tell me about what you discovered.
Well, I'm actually going to back up. There's two aha moments that I had. One of them was about 2 months ago, and then the last one was a week ago. So I'm going to do them in chronological order, if that's okay with you. So the first one was just the idea of repurposing the content. And this really is why video is so valuable. So when you produce a show, you get a 40-minute long piece of video. But not too many people who haven't listened to your show before are necessarily going to dive in and listen to all of a 40-minute show, especially if you don't get to the good stuff for like 5, 7, 8, 9 minutes into the show. Maybe it's 25 minutes into the show. They're not going to stick. So what we did is we developed a system that we call the social media content engine. And basically, we take this raw content, and we'll do that with our copy of this episode. And I have someone who watches the whole thing and looks for clips, 15-second clips, 30-second clips, minute clips, 5-minute clips of the best pieces of the conversation. And so we then follow our standard operating procedures to turn this one piece of raw footage into what will be, by the time we're done, somewhere between 50 and 100 social media posts out of one episode. And in the beginning, of course, I didn't do that because, as you might imagine, the idea of doing that sounds daunting. It sounds like an incredible amount of work. But if you have the right systems in place, and you employ a virtual assistant or two, they can be the ones to follow the systems and do the vast majority of the work. And you're going to be paying those virtual assistants somewhere around $4 or $5 an hour if they're in the Philippines. And in my software app, we actually published that playbook. So anybody that's listening who wants to go get our system for content repurposing, they can do that. So let me just share with you, we have a blog post where we talk about the stats and the results that we got. And I'm trying to scroll through it to find the results. We got a 3. So in the first week of the launch of what we call our content engine, we had a 78% increase in the number of social media posts that we created with no more labor on my part. And we had a 380% increase in engagements. And our engagement rate per post for that period was also 167% higher than the previous period. So that's the aha from, 2 months ago, roughly. Make sure that if you're producing long form content, that you're chopping it up. And if people want to see, what does this look like? Just go to my Instagram feed or my Twitter feed, or go follow me on LinkedIn, and you'll see all these clips all over the place. It's posts like crazy. The second one is arguably even a bigger aha, and that is using paid amplification or advertising. I have, much to my detriment, have largely ignored advertising because I always, incorrectly in hindsight, thought that if I produced enough great content, people would just find it. And, 10 years ago, again, you could get away with that to a certain degree. And for many, many years, I didn't really have a great way to monetize my show. The idea of getting sponsors hadn't really occurred to me. I wasn't so much in the selling training courses space. I was doing the show mostly just because I really liked doing the show. And anytime that I did dabble with trying to create any type of ad campaign, I would lose money every single time. And it just seemed massively overwhelming to me. And then, there's so many variables to test, and then how are you going to monetize it? And it was just like, And so I would ignore it, and I would focus on the things that I knew how to do. And for the last few years, thanks to the support of some affiliates, I really didn't need to worry that much about traffic, to be honest with you. And I had one affiliate in particular that was driving the bulk of the sales for my number one product. And we were making a lot of money, and so I was fat, dumb, and happy, for lack of a better expression. So this aha is a method for rapid, inexpensive testing. So you get this idea. So here's the problem that we all have, and set aside advertising for a minute. You got this thing. You got an idea. You either have an idea for a thing you want to sell, or you got a thing you want to sell. And you want to know what is the message that I need to put onto the internet to attract the right audience to buy the thing? Don't we all have that problem? Mm-hmm. And it can be quite perplexing. So I'll use my software company as a case study to explain this. So my software company's process, it's called Flowster. It's process management software. Anybody in any industry has processes. So anybody in any industry could technically come and buy the software. But as you might imagine, trying to market my software to the whole wide world would be cost prohibitive. It would be like trying to boil the ocean. It would be, an impossible task. So then I, like virtually every other software founder on planet Earth, I got to find who my audience is. Who's my tribe? Who are the people that are really going to want to buy this stuff? And what are the messages that are going to really resonate with these people so that my ad costs, my CPA is affordable, and so that I can actually scale this thing up without, burning through millions of dollars before I achieve profitability. Up until a week ago, I had no idea how to do that, because the whole thing, as I mentioned to you, sounded just overly complex to me. But then I was introduced to this idea of rapid testing. And let's give an example of like Netflix, for example. If you open up a browser of Netflix and then you open up an incognito browser of Netflix and you type in their homepage, it's pretty unlikely those two homepages that you see are going to be exactly the same, because they are running literally thousands of experiments over and over and over and over. And now it's easier for Netflix to do this because, one, they have a lot of traffic already, and two, they've got all these engineers to do all this stuff. So how do you compete with that? Well, it's actually not as hard as you would think it would be. So let's use Facebook as an example, and I'll talk about I have experiments running literally as we're recording this episode. So again, this started with, I need to figure out what problem is the most pressing problem that my target audience of business owners might want to buy a solution to, and what are the words that they describe to describe that problem. And prior to discovering this very simple technique, which I'm going to explain, I was like trying to get so I thought, originally I thought Amazon, the brands that sell on Amazon would be my target customer. And I thought that because I've got this playbook. It's called Webs, Wholesale E-commerce Business System. It's a collection of standard operating procedures. I've sold millions of dollars of this thing to Amazon resellers. And then I discovered that, they're not so good at paying a software subscription. They don't pay. They churn out of the software too quickly, which is the kiss of death for software. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, that audience is not going to fly. They're startup entrepreneurs. Many of them fail. They give up. They don't pay long enough. Okay, that's no good. Well, who should I sell this thing to? So I thought, I'll try selling it to the brands themselves, the companies that actually make the stuff that's sold on Amazon. And you know how hard it was for me to try and get phone calls with brands where they didn't know me. I'm a stranger. They think I'm going to try and sell them something. And I'm literally I sent out 200 emails saying, I will pay you for your time. I will donate money to your charity of choice if you will talk to me for between 15 and 20 minutes. Like crickets, man. Mm-hmm. One.
Yeah.
So then I had to reach out to a consultant, and I paid him $300 for his hour, and he consulted with brands. So he was like a barometer for brands, but it wasn't good enough. It wasn't talking to the brands directly. And so this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I'm like dying trying to figure out, is this going to be my tribe? Let alone, and why would they buy, and what words would they use, and ugh. So I think I've explained the problem enough now that I should probably fast forward and talk about the solution.
Yeah, okay.
So what I figured out was you could run what I call, the person who taught me this, it's called a color block ad experiment. And it's a very rapid testing methodology that's super cheap. So I can have an idea in my head, and I can test that idea in less than 4 hours for about $20. And it's the simplest thing in the world. So as an example of that, what you do is go into Canva or some type of app, and you're going to make like a square, 800 by 800 pixels, and put it on some unusual background or two colors or something that is going to interrupt people's pattern as they're scrolling. Like, don't use a picture of a girl or a car. Don't do that. Just like some unusual, something that's really different than everybody else's ads is basically what you want to do. Because they're like, oh, what's this? It catches their attention for just a split second. And then you're going to put a statement, just like one short sentence on the ad. And this is the sentence that would describe the problem or a problem that you think your potential target audience might have. So in my case, let me pull some of these up here. in my case, there's lots of problems that a marketing agency owner might use my software to solve. These problems include, I'm not getting enough leads. I'm having a hard time delegating work to my team. My team's letting work fall through the cracks. I don't have enough appointments in my calendar. So how can my software solve all those problems? Well, because we're process management software. And if you had a process for any one of those things, then it makes achieving success with that thing easier because you've got a process for it, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But again, like so many different ways to describe the problems. How the hell am I going to know what way is going to land and how can I find it out quickly? So I ran, I do these 10 at a time. I come up with 10 what I call problem statements. So one of them, training new employees is a huge challenge for my company, ... That's one problem statement. Another one, I got to drag the column so I can read it. My dream of owning my own business has become a nightmare of long hours and stress, ... And the ... at the end is just to create some level of curiosity, because all I'm looking for here is clicks. I'm not looking for conversions or leads or sales. I'm not looking for any of that stuff. I just want clicks, and I'll explain why in a minute. So I feel trapped and need more freedom in my business. On and on. You get the idea. You just create all these problem statements. I don't get enough traffic to my website. Whatever the problems are that you think your target audience has, you're going to write these out, and you're going to make one ad per target audience. So actually, let me back up a little bit because I want to make sure I cover the important details. The audience that you select, I'll come back to the ads in a minute. The audience that you select is also critically important. You want to pick a target audience that is between 1 and 5 million people. If it's way more than 5 million, the data is not going to be as valuable. So how do you do that? You create your ad set and you say, well, okay, so in my case, I know that a lot of marketing agencies would have a Facebook page. So one of the targets on Facebook's targeting is somebody is a Facebook page admin. Okay, check. Mm-hmm. And I know that HubSpot is ridiculously popular with marketing agency owners. So I said, okay, cool. They have an interest in HubSpot and they're a Facebook page admin. So Facebook told me that's 4.9 million people. Perfect. That is the perfect size audience. And I intuitively have a reasonable amount of certainty that my marketing agency persona is probably going to be in that audience for the reasons that I just explained. So there's my audience. So now I create this ad set. I got 10 ads in there and I let it go. And all I'm looking for, and I write rules for some really simple rules. Here's what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. You don't want the ad to run for any longer than 400 impressions. 400 impressions is enough impressions so that the data will be accurate about 80% of the time. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking within those 400 impressions, I want at least 5 clicks. Mm-hmm. And I want my cost per result to be less than 50 cents. If I can get all 3 of those things on an ad, the company's called Mint CRO, mintcro.com. That's where I learned this.
MINT?
They call that MIT, yeah, Mint CRO.
As in mint.cro or mint?
I think I don't know. Let me look. I think it's mintcro.com. People will figure it out. They can type in one or the other and they'll figure it out. Okay. It's 2 incredibly smart women who founded this company. And they've got you can the training for what I'm explaining, you buy it for like $50. So you get these gold coins. So here's a perfect example. I figured out and I did this in 3 hours today, that the best gold coin that I have discovered so far is that training new employees is a huge challenge in my business. I paid 33 cents. That's of every phrase that I tested, that was the least expensive. It got 13 clicks on only 400 and change impressions. So lots of people were clicking it and the clicks didn't cost very much. Mm-hmm. What does that tell me? That tells me that is a very real problem. Training new employees is a huge challenge for my business, for that particular target audience, which based upon my 2 filtering criteria is probably a lot of marketing agencies. And it makes sense because marketing agencies need people to grow, right? Like the more people you have, you got to train them. It's expensive. It takes a long time. They got to be trained the right way, or they don't do the work the right way. And then service delivery is inconsistent. And then the clients get pissed off. Like it just intuitively makes sense. So that's just the first step of how you stop marketing and start becoming an engineer to figure out, using data, what your audience really wants.
In other words, you're running essentially a survey on steroids.
Bingo.
Yep. And
I can get my results in 3 hours. My daily, one other piece of information, I set the daily budget to $40. So I can get my results in 3 hours, and I can test 10 ads, and the whole thing will cost me like $25. So in the space of a week, I literally could test 100, 200, 300, 400 different messages. Would that give the average business owner some valuable insights on the words that are most likely to resonate with their target audience to describe the problem that's most important to them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're damn right it would. And now there's a whole bunch more. I haven't even learned it all yet. There's a whole bunch more on how you do, on where you go from there. But even having that piece of information, think about this like YouTube video production, content production. Oh, what should I make a video about? I could make it about this. I could make it about this. I could make it about this. I should write a blog post. Well, what should I write about? Why guess at that stuff? Why wouldn't you say, put up 10 YouTube titles of 10 YouTube videos that you're thinking of making and see which one gets the best results, and then make that video because your market told you that's the one they're most interested in. Let's say you want to add a feature to your software. Well, you could run surveys and talk to users and do all this stuff. Or you could just run an ad test like I just described and literally describe 10 different feature ideas in a sentence. Or take a sentence that describes the problem that a given feature would potentially solve. And then figure out which problem resonated the most and go build that feature.
Yeah, it's basically you're not guessing anymore.
No.
And it's interesting, if you go right back to when Tim Ferriss wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, he actually...
Same idea for title of the book?
That's exactly what he did. He went and found, what title should I use? And he tested both the title and the subtitle.
Yep.
Yeah. But what we have now, he actually had a lot blunter tools back then than we have today, because he did not have Facebook. I think he was running Google Ads, I think very basic. Yeah, I think it was Google Ads, very basic. And... whereas you're talking about something that's very, very targeted and incredibly measurable as well.
Oh, yeah. And it's fast. It's cheap. Like I've run, 60, 70 ads now, and I haven't even spent $200. Now, for some people, $200 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, $200 is not a lot of money. If you are a business owner, $200 not a lot of money. To get data that's this valuable to help you, launch your next course or your next blog post or your next YouTube video or whatever it is that you're going to do. Or because here's really all you need to, because what do we all want? I want a systematic way to attract customers like clockwork.
Yeah, predictable. Yep.
Yeah, all I need is one ad that has been thoroughly tested, one landing page that has been thoroughly tested, and there's a whole process for that, and then one upsell page that has been thoroughly tested. When you have those 3 assets, you literally can just turn the spigot on and off whenever you want. Oh, I need more customers, turn your ads back on. Oh, I have enough customers, turn your ads off. Because it's driven by data. And as would come as probably no surprise to anyone listening, at some point in the relatively near future, one of our playbooks in the Flowster marketplace, where we provide our customers with all these templates, I'm going to take all this stuff and I'm going to turn it into playbooks, and it'll be available for Flowster users.
So you're using this Facebook marketing method, that mintcro.com, which we'll find who that is and we'll include that in the notes. You're using this for your Flowster app, is that correct? Product?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because we have a very real problem. Who should we attract? What's the problem that they want to solve? What are the words they use to describe that problem? And then I'll create an ad and a landing page that uses those words and speaks to that problem. And mark my words, people will sign up like crazy because we'll have tested every single headline, every paragraph, every sentence, every image. We'll literally, the way that they describe it is you paint your landing page with the data from your tests. Instead of, sitting there and hiring a copywriter to just think up what words they think would be the right words, which is totally the wrong way to do it, because opinions aren't worth shit, to be honest with you. In the world of digital, It's data. So why would you go out and hire an expensive copywriter for, to write your sales page for 20 grand when you could literally say, okay, I need my sales page to have 6 headlines because I want people to scroll all the way to the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to test all those 6 headlines until I find my 6. Cool. Then I'm going to test the first sentence of every paragraph. Okay, cool. You get where I'm going? I mean, you literally are just going to test every single element. They have pages with 100% scroll rate. 100% scroll rate. That does not happen by accident.
This is on Mint CRO. Wow, that's
and their client stories were phenomenal.
Right. So I think that is such a fascinating aha moment for you, which has only happened a week ago.
Yeah, big time.
Right, and you're using that to market, I suppose, the Flowster app as well as a podcast. You're going to do the podcast as well, but more at the Flowster app at the moment is your real focus. Is that correct?
It is, and then as soon as I get that going, my next area of attention will be my brightideas.co website, because indirectly, Bright Ideas does generate leads for Flowster. It's another one of our marketing assets. But my show and my website, I want more downloads. I need more website traffic. I need a bigger list. I've never used paid traffic to amplify that message. Well, I know from my reviews on iTunes, because my average rating is 5 stars. I know people love my show. So I just need to get more people to be exposed to the show. And I will split test. It's not called split testing. I will micro test or rapid test, sprint test, whatever way you want to describe it, my way to figuring out exactly what I need to put on the homepage of the Bright Ideas blog and the ad that I need to run so that I can significantly increase my traffic, downloads, and email list.
I think
if there was 2 of me, we would be working on it right now.
Yeah, but it's great when you have those discoveries, isn't it? It's just like,
oh yeah, this is the best one I've had in a good long time.
It's not like it's not like a light bulb's gone off. It's more like a searchlight's turned on.
The fog has been lifted, because, as I mentioned to you before, being an ad guy was never a skill I developed because I didn't know, for example, knowing like what. So I ran these ads, okay, and I'm looking at the data, but what pieces of data should I look at? And what are the numbers that I want to have? Like, I didn't know what that was. Should impressions? How many impressions do I need to be statistically significant? And do I want to pay attention to my cost per result, or like, is it my cost per click, or it was just confusing to me because I didn't know anything about it. And the beauty of getting trained by people who know what the hell they're doing is you don't have to recreate the wheel.
That's fantastic. I think the listeners are going to love that piece of insight.
Well, tell them Trent sent you when you sign up.
I think
I'm in the process of actually attempting to do a collaboration with them to put their stuff, their processes, to create processes for their material and to put it into Flowster. So if you go look up Aaron or Jess, tell them Trent sent you.
Okay, fantastic. Now, I think that's a perfect point and segue into, let's have a bit more of a chat. Well, have a chat now about Flowster in a more specific way. So Flowster, you started in 2016, is that correct?
No, 28. Well, we started writing code in the fall of, call it the summer of 2017. And we spent a year writing code before we had our MVP. And then it was released in the fall of 2018. But Flowster, and maybe I'm jumping ahead and you have questions, but I'll just quickly finish this. Flowster was never really marketed as an independent software company until just recently.
Okay.
Earlier in our conversation, I mentioned to you that I had a really popular product called Webs, which is still a really popular product. And that's a collection of standard operating procedures that is typically purchased by somebody who would like to start or build an Amazon reseller business, because I own a business like that. That's the one that got me on the Inc. 5000. So for the first 2 years, we sold so much of Webs, I didn't really have to worry about marketing Flowster as a standalone platform. I just was focused on marketing Webs, and the reason was because it was really, really profitable to do. And it allowed me to amass a war chest of cash, which I'm now using to fund the growth of the software company. So about 6 months ago, I realized that I was really doing a disservice to myself to not also market the software company as a standalone software company, because really Webs is just one playbook. A playbook is a collection of standard operating procedures. Webs was the original playbook that we had. Well, now we have tons of them, and we're creating more through partnerships all of the time. So it's kind of like Netflix. Like, why would you want Netflix if there was only one movie? It wouldn't be very interesting. It would only be interesting to people who are interested in that movie. And so Webs is like a movie. Well, we want to make Flowster like the Netflix of standard operating procedures for digital marketers. So we have a lot more movies and TV shows to create, and Flowster is the underlying platform where they all live.
So let's step back a little bit from Flowster. So Webs, how's that spelt, by the way?
Just WEBS. It's an acronym for Wholesale E-commerce Business Systems.
Right.
If people want to learn more about it, they can go to brightideas.co/webs,
Okay.
and they can learn all about it.
So Webs was essentially the genesis for Flowster.
Correct, 100%.
Okay, so let's go to Webs then. What was the big problem you were trying to solve, and what made you start Webs?
It was an accident. I started it for myself. I built it for myself because I started this Amazon reseller business. And the process of sourcing new products and developing supplier relationships was super labor intensive. You had to analyze thousands of products. Then you had to figure out who made the product. Then you had to figure out who at the company you should talk to. Then you had to figure out their contact information, and then you had to email them. And our goal when we started was to send like 100 of those emails a week. And then we got to the point where we were sending 500-600 of those emails a week. So as you might imagine, that's a lot of work to do all that stuff. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that work because that sounds to me like really boring, repetitive work. I'd much rather have a virtual assistant in the Philippines do the work. So because I've been using VAs in the Philippines for years, I already knew that the best way to have success with a VA was to give them a very clear set of instructions. The clearer the instructions, the higher the success probability. So I sat down and started to write all these procedures out. And originally they were in Google Docs, but we quickly realized there was all sorts of reasons why that wasn't a good idea. So then we moved them into what is now a competitor's software application. Then I got invited to speak. So I had no Flowster and I had no Webs product. I just had the procedures that we developed for ourselves, and my company was growing like crazy. Then I got invited to speak at a conference about the success of my company. And thanks to my podcast and my YouTube channel, most of the people in the audience knew who I was. And when I said, hey, I don't have anything for sale, I'm just going to tell you guys how I did this. Take good notes. Good luck. Here we go. Well, it was a very highly detailed talk. Like I basically fire hosed them with a ton of information, a ton of detail. And much to my surprise, at the end of the talk, a large number of people came up to me and said, I loved what you talked about. I agree completely. We need those processes. I shouldn't be doing this myself. I need to hire a VA. Any chance you'd sell me a copy of your procedures? And after like the 12th person said that to me, I was like, oh, I guess this is maybe a thing. And so we did a product launch. We made a copy of our procedures. We did a product launch. We had the support of the organizer of the event. And we sold about $400,000 worth of these things in 5 days. I was like, what? And so, it was pretty profitable, as you might imagine, because digital products don't cost, there's no cost to goods sold. And so the organizer and I split the money half each. It was my product, his audience. So we split it half and half. And that was when I was like, okay, I got to do that again. And so I called a good buddy of mine who had built and sold his software company. And I said, look, this is what happened. This is how much I sold. I want to make a software company. And he said, yeah, I'm in. And so that was when we started coding in the fall of 2017, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And launched in 2018.
Yeah, and then we would do a launch every 6 months, and each launch was about $400,000 that we were selling, and then we'd do some organic and internal sales, about $1 million a year worth of these templates for Amazon resellers, and I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. I've never had this kind of success before.
So, your discovery with Webs was you solving a problem for yourself. That was a big problem. You were wasting all your time chasing all this, trying to set up a reseller business going, okay, let's write a standard operating procedure for this. And that's how Webs got started. And then you actually tested the marketplace by going to a conference and didn't know you were testing.
Correct. I really had no idea I was testing.
And then from that, you made your first nearly $250,000 personally in 5 days. And the organizer, the same. Because he split the 400,000, and they're going, wow, the easiest money I ever made, which came out of pain and solving a big challenge and a problem. Now, so we've done Webs, that's going well. So Flowster, how did that start?
Well, like I say, just in the way
he started because, maybe you've already answered in a way that, you said, okay, we can code this and that's where,
Well, I realized that after the first launch was so successful that I was going to do this more and more. And I was thankfully smart enough to realize, okay, so I should, in addition to owning the content, the standard operating procedures, I should probably own the software layer as well. Like, why do I want to feed customers to somebody else's software and get like a little affiliate commission when instead I could own the software and build another asset.
Yep.
And so that was why we decided to create Flowster. Now, in hindsight, the mistake that I made, because I make lots of mistakes, I am a world-class mistake maker. And the mistake that I made was not realizing soon enough that I should be marketing Flowster. Like, for 2 years, I did nothing to market Flowster. No content, no blog posts, no ads, like literally nothing. The only way people ever found out about Flowster was because they bought Webs. That was it. And so that was a huge mistake to not do what I'm doing now, 2 years ago. Because if I had, Flowster would be well far and ahead of where we are in terms of, number of customers and annual revenue and so forth. But thanks to the ad strategy that I described earlier in this very episode, I do think that we will be able to make incredibly fast progress. Like if we don't 10x our revenue in the next 12 months, I'll eat my shoes.
Okay. Well, I hope.
And I'll film it and I'll put it on YouTube.
Well, maybe run another interview in a year's time, and I'm sure we won't be seeing you eat your shoes on the show. Now,
hopefully not.
So within Flowster, you've obviously got Webs, in other words, standard operating procedure for Amazon resellers. What are some of the other standard operating procedures and templates you have on Flowster?
We have hundreds and hundreds of them. We have, if you go to the Flowster marketplace, just from the categories, we have procedures for advertising, procedures that are specific to Amazon, procedures for customer support, for design, for e-commerce, for education and training, health and safety, human resources, inventory management, lead generation, marketing, product sourcing, professional services, sales, SEO, shipping and logistics, social media, software, and store management. Those are just the categories. And then in each one of those categories, there could be, 1 to like 30 or 40 different standard operating procedure templates that are available. So because here's what I realized, and the sales of webs taught me this. People don't want to make their procedures on their own. Like on my talk, I explained to everybody what to do. All they had to do was watch the recording and like literally just map out what I explained, and they could make their own procedures. But no, they didn't want to do that. It's too much work, man. I don't want to do all that work. So I want to just pay you money to get pre-made procedures. And so I took that lesson into Flowster, and I thought, okay, so we have competitors that are not industry specific. They're just going horizontally, and they're spending millions of dollars on ads to promote their platform, but they're not giving people very much in the way of pre-made procedures. It's starting to change. Some of my competitors are wising up, but we put a lot of effort into creating these templates because nobody wants to start from scratch. So all the templates are customizable. So now if you're like, well, I want to fill my calendar, I need an outbound marketing playbook. Well, we have an outbound marketing playbook, and it describes all the different pieces of software that you could stitch together. It shows you in checklist format exactly how to do absolutely everything so that you could build a semi or fully automated prospecting system that your VA could run for you. Or SEO. We've got a playbook for SEO that we did in partnership with SEMrush. We're going to have soon to have more playbooks on what I've talked about earlier in this, on Facebook advertising and how to generate traffic through ads, and how to test cheap and fast, like all of those things. We've got how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. We've got how to set up what's that app? I want to say Roundhouse. That's not it.
Clubhouse.
I'm forgetting what. Clubhouse, thank you. How to set up a Clubhouse room. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. We've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these templates all around the one theme of digital marketing. So we have more templates than anybody I know on planet Earth who's in this space, the software space, the process management space for digital marketers.
I think what you've touched on is pretty much what every entrepreneur has discovered that is successful, and it's the power of process. You're giving them templates that enable them to scale their business through processes. I think some of I've mentioned this before, but GitHub, for example, makes public its own internal processes and has 8,500 pages of processes. So GitHub, as publisher, just makes it in the public domain, but that's for their particular business. Okay, so you're creating in partnership with some of the best in the business globally, like SEMrush, who we work with as well. In other words, what's best operating procedure or standard operating or best operating procedure instead of just standard operating procedure, because you're identifying some of the best players on the market. Just for example, CRO.com. So what I've discovered in talking to entrepreneurs over the last decade, but more focused on the podcast Jeff Bullis show, is that you free yourself up as an entrepreneur, and this is what you discovered, when you create processes that you can hand over to someone else to do for you, and you buy back your time.
Oh, hell yeah. You do.
And that's where you do free yourself up as an entrepreneur to, it actually makes life simple. By delegating and also identifying the standard operating procedures that the person you've delegated to knows what to do. And this is what I discovered too with the podcast a year ago, was setting up a process that just makes it so easy for me. And then it's all done through a standard process behind the scenes. So I think what we've touched on today and what you're doing is really helping entrepreneurs scale themselves and scale their business. And now you've touched on the last little discovery, which is how can I amplify that scale even more by rapid testing. I think it's you've had some aha moments. We all make a lot of mistakes, but I think you've touched on some of the core things that entrepreneurs' biggest challenges.
Yeah, I would. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. I know a lot of entrepreneurs. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I could not agree more with what you've said. We all suffer from these same problems, and my tests that I've been doing of, I'm too stressed, I work too much, all of these statements get lots of clicks. It's a very, very real problem. I like to joke that as an entrepreneur, we have this thing that we call entrepreneurial freedom, which is supposed to be the freedom to design a life however the hell we choose to design it. Sadly, for many entrepreneurs, it pans out to be the freedom to work 24 hours a day just to keep up, because they become, especially us small business owners, we become the bottlenecks of our own business because we weren't taught. Like, delegation is a skill, but nobody's buying training courses on delegation. Nobody's selling training course that I'm aware of on delegation. They're all like, hey, how to advertise on Facebook and how to sell on Amazon and how to do this and how to do that. And that's all fine and sexy, and that's what gets people's attention. But then they get into their business and they're so busy doing the do or running on the treadmill that growth stops. They hit a ceiling because they literally can't work anymore. And now they start to pay a price for it in their health and in their relationships and stress level and so forth. And the key that fortunately, I'm not even going to take credit for figuring out. I read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber years ago. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I got to do that. Got to stop being the cook in my kitchen and just be the guy overseeing the cooks in the kitchen. And as soon as that light bulb went on for me, that changed my life as an entrepreneur. And that light bulb sadly has not gone on for near enough people. Or it goes on, but then they don't know how to actually make it happen. They're aware, I should delegate more. I should build a team. But they still don't know how to do it. They don't know the first step. They don't know how to hire a VA. They don't know which tasks to delegate. They don't know how to create a process for those tasks because maybe their brain isn't wired to think that way, which mine is. And so they suffer, and they suffer in silence or in their family. So, I mean, it really bums me out. And I'm on a mission to solve that problem for my fellow small business owners.
I think that's an awesome mission. And you've accepted that. You've accepted the mission.
I have indeed.
So just to wrap it up, it's been a fabulous conversation. I've learned a lot. That's the upside for me as well as the relationship. I think it's been great to meet you, and it's been an absolute pleasure. What is a couple of things that, as an entrepreneur, lessons or tips that you'd like to leave for our audience that you've discovered are really, really important? I think we've touched on some of them, but maybe just what are the two most important things entrepreneurs should do? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure.
Parting thoughts on that.
Two things. Number one, if you don't have an assistant, you are the assistant. So the very first thing that you should do is hire an assistant. I have virtual assistants that I mentioned to you, which are readily available in the Philippines for $4 an hour. My personal assistant is in Mexico. I pay her a little bit more than that, but not very much more. And that way they're on the same time zone as me. And she went to college, writes perfect English, and does an amazing amount of work. So that's the first thing. Get help. And the second thing is you got to have procedures in place so that when you hire these people, they don't have to have experience in your business. They just need to be able to follow instructions and execute those procedures. And then just figure out what's like the $10 an hour jobs that I really shouldn't be doing. Basic market research, looking up contact information, managing my inbox, just look at all the stuff that sucks up your time and sucks the life out of you and figure out which of those things can you turn into a process so that you can get it off your desk and stop doing it. If you just did those two things for the next 3 months, your life will change, I promise you.
I think that's very wise words. So, and just to sum that up, do two things. Delegate, give that person standard operating procedures. And then I suppose the last thing which you've discovered now is amplify your business then as well.
Yes.
And
document and delegate
Yep.
so that you can amplify without drowning.
That's right. As it says, you've then given the entrepreneur the freedom code.
Yeah. And it's the
Awesome.
same one I'm using. I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid. I'm not telling people to do anything that I don't actively do in my own business. This is literally, I'm doing exactly the same thing as the advice that I'm giving.
Well, it's great to see you eating your own dog food, as we say in Australia.
Yep.
And thank you very much for those wise insights, Trent. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Jeff, thank you so much for making the time and all the copious mentions of my software company. Obviously, I really appreciate that. And if there's anything I can do for you or your audience, please do not hesitate to let me know.